Hello everyone, welcome to the Idea Roastery. I'm Jason.
And I'm Herman.
So Herman, I heard a story that you had a little bit of an incident with a certain banking provider in South Africa. Do you want to tell us about it?
You're very coy about it, but yes, I...
Do you want to oust them, or do you want to keep it...
You know what, I'm actually happy ousting them, because they're such a large institution. It's not like I'm doxing a specific person. It's one of the largest four banks in South Africa. It's FNB. And First National Bank, and so what has happened is there was some fraud that happened on my credit card while I was traveling for a very non-trivial amount of money, and I have over the years just assumed that banking customer support is bad. It's just because it's always been bad. It's almost a meme at this point where, and I kid you not, this is the workflow for if I need to get in touch with someone at FNB to help me with anything. You call their call center, and it first plays you a minute-long recording about how you can do everything in the app. Now, usually when I'm calling them, it's because something is broken in the app, so it feels like a bit of an FU to have something break in the app, and then to get on the call center and the first thing they tell me is like, hey, you dingus, you should just be using the app. Right? So then it will take you to their helpful bot, and it'll say, I'm still learning, so please be patient with me. Tell me what it is you need, and I will put you in touch with the correct department. So in this case, I'll say like fraud department, right? Or I'm following up on my fraud. So yeah, but I'd say fraud department, and then it will patch me through.
Did you say accounts?
Well, it'll patch me through to the business desk, but then it will ask me to type in my ID number followed by the hash key, right? Which is also silly because I'm generally calling via the app, so it should be pre-authenticated. So I get to the business desk, and then the business desk lady, I'm like, hey, I've had a fraud case open and I just want to follow up with it. And the business desk lady will be like, you dingus, you're supposed to be speaking to the fraud department, right? So I'm like, I know, can you put me through to the fraud department? So she puts me through to the fraud department, and the fraud department asks me to verify my ID again, right? I'm like, so okay, so the ID is lost in transit over there and they need to get the ID again. Fair enough, I understand that this is a crumbling system. But then when I tell the fraud department that I'm following up on a fraud case, there's another like, oh, you dingus, you're supposed to be speaking to the fraud follow-up department. I'm like, I know, okay, just patch me through to them, get to the fraud follow-up department. And this is if the line doesn't go dead at some point, because this happens regularly, and then it takes you all the way to the beginning and you have to listen to the pre-recorded message again. And in most cases, I just give up. But then I get to the fraud follow-up department, and the person at the fraud follow-up department has no access to information outside of the information that I already have. So like my fraud case information is just like this checklist, like fraud has been acknowledged, and it just shows like nothing has happened in an investigation or anything like that. And so there's just like, they can only tell me that and just say, okay, it's time for you to be patient, right? Which is fine. I understand like sometimes customer support, you need patience, but like this is a recurring theme whenever I try to get in touch with with customer support over there. And also in most cases, they can't help me out. So if there's something wrong with their app, their response is like, there's something wrong with the app, right? So I've moved over, I've left that bank entirely, and I've moved both my personal and my business banking over to a new bank that is like an up-and-comer. It's not one of the big incumbents. And it made me realize just how much the incumbents are resting on their laurels, because people rarely switch banks. They kind of like go with the bank for life, or they use the same bank that like their parents were using. And so I've switched over to Capitec, and everything works, right? But every now and then I'll run into an issue. So like, let's take for instance, my accountant loaded the tax payment to SARS last week, and I went to try and release it, and then when I pressed release on the app, it just said, failed to release. So then there's a little phone button in the app, and I press the phone button, and I kid you not, Jason, on the first ring, a real person answers and says, "Hello, Herman." So I'm obviously pre-authenticated. "How can I help you?" And I tell them what my problem is, and they literally solve it like in 3 minutes. Like and the thing is that like I'm not paying any more for the service. Hell, on my personal bank account, I had a private banker and I could never get in touch with them. One time I tried to tell them that I was going traveling and if they could prepare my cards for travel, and he's like, "Oh, you need to email this other person." And I'm like, "But you're my banker." So anyhow, as I'm sure people would have caught on by now, we're going to talk about customer service.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a constant struggle. I think I'm in the banking context. I think that's probably the reason why this whole open banking thing came about, right? I'm lucky that in the UK there's kind of a lot of, because there's so much competition and it's so easy because of open banking to just kind of switch. It's like you kind of want to hold on to customers as much as possible through like really good support. I've had it too also with like the tax service, right? So I was due a refund and I called in, and I think my problem is that, and maybe this is for you as well, as a technical person, like when I encounter a problem, it is usually a problem that I've already tried to solve myself through other mechanisms. So for instance, with this refund, there is a portal where you can go and request a refund, right? So I've done that already, and I've already gone to go check the status, and it just hasn't arrived. So I'm phoning having already known, I've already done some troubleshooting already. And I think that's where it becomes grating for us, because we kind of we've already done some troubleshooting before, and this is kind of our last resort. And so that's where I'm really like, I don't care about the app. I've already tried that. I've tried restarting. The other one I get a lot is app support. So like some of the banking apps, like there's a feature that doesn't quite work, and then I go in and they're like, "Oh, just have you tried reinstalling?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've done that. I've done like 4 stops. I've done this." And so maybe it's just a bit of the technical people. I think from a business side, having also worked in support before, there are a lot of people who kind of just phone in to like have very random questions. And I think from a business perspective, like when it comes to like metrics of customer support, they're usually just looking at like the cases solved and the amount of time that's spent not paying someone to actually be on call. So I think there's a lot of different levers involved. How would you say in your own products you have taken what you've learned from these bad experiences or the good experiences and applied it?
That's a really good question. So I've found that a lot of companies are burying the way to take up an actual person's time, because actual people cost money, right? I'd say with the large tech providers, Amazon is the one standout over there where you can generally always get a support engineer on the phone if you need help. Whereas I dare you to try and get in touch with a Microsoft support agent or an Apple support agent or anything like that. So on Bear, and Just Sketch Me, but on Bear is the one that I still receive a lot of emails on. I am available for people to email me, and I get a decent few emails each day. What I've done over the years, however, is I've used the feedback, and granted, Bear is a very simple piece of software, and it's got very defined constraints. So if I have too many emails coming in about the same thing, let's take, for instance, people are struggling to add a custom domain because they don't necessarily understand how DNS records work so well. If I get too many emails that are along that line, it means that I need to build something that makes it easier for people to do that. So a step-by-step procedure. Instead of just saying, change your records and put your new domain name over here, I instead say, open up an account with a DNS register like Porkbun, and then go and add this and this in the DNS section, and then press the button over here and it will verify your domain. Okay, great. And then also make sure that there's good supporting documentation around there that says, like, if you're still having problems, follow this link over here, and there's some documentation that'll give people a whole bunch of additional info, just in case there's something niche about it. Like, oh, you're using Cloudflare, you know what, don't have the CDN turned on or stuff like that. So this works because I can go and update the product quickly, but it also works for, let's take for instance Capitec, because Capitec, the bank, is, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like several orders of magnitude smaller than FNB. It's been around for a lot shorter time. It's got a much smaller customer base, and they don't offer as many services, and so it's much easier for them to just like streamline their product and make sure that there's fewer bugs and to act on those bugs when they come around. But I also make it easy for people to get in touch with me, so you can go to my contact page and my email address is there. However, and this is a intentional decision, on my contact page I have a picture of my face, of me like smiling, and the reason for this is I want people to mentally take note that I am emailing a person who has time constraints. And then I also put I know it sounds silly for a contact page, but I actually have my business hours on there. I'm generally on time between 9 and 5 UTC. Outside of those hours, give me some time to get back to you. And since I put my face up there and put my business hours up there, I actually saw fewer people email me with just random questions. I think there's also a specific kind of person who they could go and read through the docs, but they just find sending an email a lot easier. And I feel like this kind of gets people to pause and say like, am I going to waste his time with it? Or should I? And I also have on my contact page, if you're doing bear stuff, you should probably take a look at the docs. But I don't bury it. I don't make it impossible for people to get in touch with me like a lot of companies do. And I think that healthy balance between the two means that people can resolve their own issues, but if they have a genuinely difficult thing, they can get in touch with me.
Yeah. I think it's also like it just is, I guess, the company's priorities of like whether they're spending a lot of time on like product design and how it actually integrates together. What it's most likely is like the older bank is just dealing with a lot of like technical debt that they just haven't been able to tame, because I can imagine in a banking scenario, like to change one sort of system for another is going to take ages. And a lot of these companies aren't even, using cloud, where I think Capitec is probably already like quite like deep in the cloud space. So to spin up a new service that does something like really interesting, it's a lot quicker for like a newer banking provider. Yeah.
Have you ever had to speak to customer support about something and been put in touch with their helpful chatbot and actually managed to resolve your issue?
I think it's evolving, because for instance, like, so sometimes on a website or an app, I can see that there's always like a little pop-up like question bar thing. And what I know now is that a lot of these things do automatically plug into like docs, for instance. So when I feel like I'm too lazy to read the docs, sometimes I just open it and then I just ask the question, because I know the AI behind that's maybe going to answer my question quicker than me having to actually go through and find all the docs. So I do think there's like an evolution of like what, support entails, because obviously you can go onto Google, you can go onto like, ChatGPT or Claude and ask the question. But if it's already built in there, I kind of imagine that it has a better context of the app that it represents. So sometimes I do find myself just asking that, but it's not necessarily, I guess, maybe for like follow-ups on like parcel tracking that sometimes come up good. But that's usually because I've opened up a chat, because I know like I don't have the time to just sit on the call and wait. So I open the chat and then I just ask a few questions and it like kind of comes back. But I do think that in the future, that person presence, it will come up at some point in your product journey, and that's going to define whether people actually hail about or like tell their friends about your product, or whether they like tell everyone to avoid. And that's like the thing that's most people need to think about, because it's not just about like your marketing presence, it's about how you make your customers feel and whether they're going to go and tell like a good story about what your product does.
Exactly. I think that the most frustrating thing, especially with this instance I had with FNB, or the constant instances I have with them, is just how powerless it makes you feel. You're like, there is nothing I can do to resolve my issue. Like no one I speak to can ever help me with it. And it also has to do with like something fairly important. It's your finances. and just feeling completely powerless to actually fix something that's wrong over there it's a disempowering feeling. But what you said about chatbots is true. Is like it is useful for information retrieval. I think it's very rare that a chatbot can resolve an actual issue. Like if there is something wrong with your account, mostly because companies don't want to trust AI to make changes because of the risk of prompt injection attacks. So there was a pretty high-profile case the other day, I think it was last week, where thousands of Instagram accounts were hacked by malicious actors messaging the chatbot, the support chatbot, and requesting an account reset. And they just didn't have the requisite steps in there to actually verify that this was the original account holder. And so many people lost access to their Instagram accounts just because they had a chatbot that didn't do this verification. And I think we will see chatbots handle more and more of this stuff in the future. But here's an example from yesterday. I'm preparing for another little trip, and I wanted to load a audiobook on my phone. Now, I'm one of those people who I refuse to take out a subscription with Audible. I will buy the full price book if I want to listen to it, because I don't listen to audiobooks that often. I'm generally reading physical books or ebooks, so I don't need like 3 credits a month. So I bought a book, and then I realized that it just wasn't showing up on my app, but I could view it on the website, and it seemed like I had 2 different Amazon accounts or 2 different Audible accounts, and I just couldn't make heads or tails of it. And so I managed to get in touch with a real person at support, and after a bit of back and forth, it turns out that on my phone, I was logged into audible.co.uk on the app, and on the website it was .com. And so I had to just squish those 2 accounts together, but it's going to be a long time before an AI would be authorized to do something such as merge 2 accounts.
Yeah. And I think that highlights a very important factor with support, is that it comes into, well, when you need a person, it's for an edge case, right? That's the whole point of support, is like your current product can't handle it, or it's not immediately obvious, and so there's an edge case that needs to be dealt with. I've had that same thing with Amazon, and I think it's like because of how old the company is, like you used to be able to log into AWS with your Amazon account, right? So it was like decoupling those, and also with respect to like privacy and data residence, like there's rules about like where your data can store. But that one that you mentioned of like people forgetting their passwords, you'll be surprised how many people forget like all their credentials, like they don't even know the login.
Oh, I'm not surprised. I regularly receive emails from people who are like, hey, I've got this blog, but I don't remember which email address I used to create it with, and I don't have I don't have both email address and password, and I also don't have access to that email anymore, no matter what it is. And I'm like, it's actually really difficult for me to restore that account to you, because there's no way that I can verify that you are who you say you are. So what I tend to do in that case is, because I'm a human and I can go and I can verify these things, I go into their account and I see that if there are any posts that are still in draft, right? Because draft posts aren't public. And then I ask them what their draft posts are, and if they can accurately tell me what drafts they are, or paraphrase what their drafts are, then I restore account access to them.
That's quite neat. Yeah, like I think it's but not every scenario is going to have like that. But it does need to. I think it just does need to be something that people think about more often. I like this idea of you have like a person answering the call, but then they're managing a bunch of agents, right? So you have that sort of personal touch, similar to like you were expecting with a bank, like a personal banker, which I think is also like a bit of a fraud, where they're like, you got access to a private banker, but all they're doing is it's just like an account manager. But like having the ability to give someone that personal touch, especially with like higher ticket offers or like higher ticket products where you're paying a lot, or like in fraud cases, or like where the customer is going to definitely feel like worried because they're like, oh my gosh, am I going to like, is this a start? Is something going to happen more? So I like this idea of like you still have people, They just pick up the call, and then in the background they've got like the tools that they need to kind of, do any tweaks, and through that they can support you a lot better. But I do think it also comes down from the company's sort of leadership, that they actually want to instill that ability to have ownership. What I really liked working at Amazon is that they always said, like, if you're a support engineer, you have the ownership of the customer at the point that they sort of make contact with you. And so you kind of felt empowered to like do what's right for the customer, and that, led to people suggesting better ways to do things, and almost to to the degree that Amazon's competitive advantage is its the way that it handles customer support, because it's almost impossible now to even have non-free returns in the UK. And that was because they said, rather than having people return their stuff and pay for it, we'll just say, okay, we'll take the loss, do the return. And that's led to this almost expectation that even if you get something on eBay, you can return it straight away for free, irrespective. And that kind of has led to its competitive advantage. I remember the one story they said is I think it was one Christmas or something. They were some guy called in. He's my son hasn't received his Xbox, and it's going to be Christmas in a couple of days time. And rather than them saying, oh no, let's check where it is, they just sent a new one. And so that led to such a nice feeling for that person, that they were and now it's a story that people tell inside of Amazon. But it really does define your product. And I think it's almost especially when you're building new things, a lot of people think of sales and onboarding people and the first impressions, but they don't really think too much about that customer support, what happens, day two. And especially for your customers that have been there for a longer time, you don't want to have a customer who's been there for 10 years and then you treat them like rubbish if they have one minor sort of problem.
Yeah, I think another key is giving people the benefit of the doubt. So what happens fairly regularly, because payment processing is so complicated, my payment provider, sometimes something goes wrong, like a card is rejected or the payment goes through, and I know it's going to be refunded, but it hasn't shown up on my dashboard, so it hasn't triggered on their side. And someone will email me sort of hey, I've paid this, and it hasn't upgraded my account. And what I do in those instances is I upgrade their account immediately, manually. I say, cool. Knowing that there is a chance that the payment hasn't gone through, that actually hasn't gone through, and that there's a problem with their side, but that's okay. So what I'll do is I'll upgrade their account. I will send a support request to my payment provider asking for their insight on this. And generally the payment provider will come back and say hey, they need to actually reattempt their payment. But once I get that email back from the payment provider, I then send an email to the customer saying hey, figured out what the problem was. Can you follow this link to remake the payment? Instead of something which is a lot more frustrating, they think they've paid the money and they feel like I'm holding back the product from them. It's an adversarial relationship instead of a good one. And it's something to really stick to, because I think it's, especially if you're working fully in customer support or you're swamped by a whole bunch of low value, not low value isn't the right word, but simple requests that people could figure out themselves, I think it's easy to become jaded, and sort of keeping that upbeatness. So I like to think of customer support as being part of my craft. So I engage with it in the same way that I would engage with writing code, and I try to do it as best that I can. And this means that it takes longer than it reasonably could, but because, and I regularly receive compliments from people, they're thank you so much for getting back to me so quickly, so earnestly, so cohesively, and for resolving my issue, And I think it's the stuff like that that really makes customer support shine. And it's also one of the reasons why I've kind of become a bit of a Capitec fangirl, because I've spoken to their customer support probably about 5 times now, and every single time they answer
every
me
night
on the first,
before bed.
Yeah, no, they ask me on the first ring, and they're hey Herman, how can I help you? And they resolve my issue. And I also think, however, that I kind of feel especially when it comes to banking, I don't really have brand loyalty. Is if they start in shitifying over the next couple of years, I'll hop ship. But I feel like products need to be judged on their merit currently, not on their historic merit. And yeah.
Do you have this issue? Like I've seen it a little bit in the indie community. Is like people doing chargebacks even though they've used the product. Do you have this issue, or do you have like any guidance on how you tackle this? Because it seems like it's a big issue, like where you have like maybe a product that's semi-viral, like someone like says, "Oh, I haven't used it," so they go and do like a credit card chargeback. Is that something you deal with? Do you have like techniques around it?
I do rarely have chargebacks, but they do happen. Let's say I get like 1 or 2 a month, and in a lot of cases, it's because people think of it as a way to cancel their subscription, right? They haven't used their subscription for a month. They cancel it and they charge back the last month's subscription fee. Now, had they emailed me and said like, "Hey, I haven't used this for the past month and I've canceled my subscription. Can I get a refund for the last month?" I'll give it to them, right? Like, it's what, $6, and I'm not, again, there's this adversarial relationship that happens if you hold on to money that people believe is theirs, right? And so if someone wants a refund, I will happily give them a refund. The problem with chargebacks is that if you as a retailer receive too many chargebacks, your bank or your provider starts seeing you as high risk. And so whenever I do receive a chargeback, I make a point of reaching out to the person who opened up the chargeback and just essentially explaining that. I say like, "Hey, I see you opened up a chargeback. That's perfect. Like, that's perfectly fine. I'm super happy to give you a refund for this. Could you please remove the chargeback with your bank, because it dings me as a retailer and could affect my business in the future by reducing my credibility with my payment provider." And pretty much across the board, whenever that happens, the person says like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that it has that effect. I've called my bank. I've removed the chargeback." And I send them their refund, and everyone's happy. However, there are definitely people who try and game the system. So I have 2 products. One which is a ongoing service, and then the other one that is a product that you can use and then stop using. And so I do receive some, but very few, what would you call it, like malicious chargebacks for just Sketch Me. So like, let's say for instance, someone wants to use it for a project, right? They buy the lifetime license, they use it for the project, and then they charge back the lifetime purchase. And like, that does feel unfair, but also at the same time, I do the same thing. I send them an email and I say, "Hey, I see you've just had a chargeback. If you want a refund, I'll give you a refund. Can you please remove the chargeback, because it dings me as the retailer?" And even in those cases, they will generally say like, "Oh, I didn't recognize the transaction, so I flagged it with my bank." And I'll be like, "Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure that's the case." And I give them the benefit of the doubt, even if underneath the surface I might not fully believe it. But it resolves the issue. They get their refund, and I'm not going to contest them on it.
I think that's also like a big factor. Is I think I've had it myself when like a provider or something, you feel like you've been wronged. You almost like immediately want to counteract with like some sort of aggressive action. Like it could be like going onto Trustpilot or Hello Peter and just like reporting like a 1-star. So I get it when people like don't expect things, or you never know what their situation is. But I think the moral is to always like approach it with humanity. Do you see a world where you would automate like any parts of your? I mean, you've probably got a lot of automation in your support systems, but would you?
I actually have no automation in my support systems. My support is purely good documentation and the fact that people can get directly in touch with me. Now, granted, I'm not running at a massive scale, and that is my benefit. And also, I feel like the service is set up in such a way that it doesn't really, it's not a massive scale product. It's a niche indie product, and I also have a philosophy of sort of like grow slowly, stay small, where I build it like a person builds a community garden, right? I'm the groundskeeper. I make it nice. I'm not trying to like run 10,000 people events in my community garden. I serve the locals. They come and they have a good time. They give me a friendly wave every now and then while I'm puttering around in the flower beds. And again, this is something that works for me. However, I think if I had a much more mass market service, it would be very difficult for me as the owner operator to answer every support request myself. But I think it's important to have avenues to do that.
Yeah, I think it will take over, and I think it will get better. There are obviously going to be people who try and just shove AI in where it doesn't make sense, but I think that it will sort of wash it out, because you will know of these services that have bad support and bad products in general, and I think that will just, people will just talk about the products that have really good support and really good, customer feeling in general. Because I think the amount of care that you show in that moment where your customer is having a pain point, it does reflect on your like whole company. So hopefully the companies that do that will win, and the ones who don't.
Sure.
Hopefully you have better time with Capitec, and I'll catch you next time.
So far it's been so good. Just before you go, I apologize for a bit of the background noise over here that someone's decided to mow their lawn. But also because we're recording this a little bit later in the day, I'm right across the road from a primary school. And so like the kids come out after school and they like scream and they run around and they play sports and whatnot. And that's all well and good. But I do know that my little microphone over here does pick it up, because I installed Ghost Pepper, which is a transcription service on my computer, just to do some transcription. And more than once I've transcribed something, and then it has at the end in brackets children screaming.